Chapter 18. One day during my 5th month at Benham home, I was sitting on a rock behind the classrooms when Esther came by. She sat next to me without uttering a word. She had my lyrics notebook in her hand. I feel as if there's nothing left for me to be alive for, I said slowly. I have no family. It is just me. No one will be able to tell me stories about my childhood. I sniffed a bit. Esther put her arms around me and pulled me closer to her. She shook me to get my full attention before she started. Think of me as your family, your sister. But I didn't have a sister, I replied. Well, now you do. You see, this is the beauty of starting a new family. You can have different kinds of family members. She looked at me directly, waiting for me to say something. Okay, you can be my sister. Temporarily, I emphasized the last word. That's fine with me. So will you come to see your temporary sister tomorrow, please? She covered her face as if she would be sad if I said no. Okay. No need to be sad, I said, and we both laughed a little bit. Esther's laugh always reminded me of Abigail, a girl I had seen during my first 2 semesters of secondary school in Bowtown. Sometimes I wished Esther was Abigail so that we could talk about past times before the war. I wanted us to laugh with all our beings, longer and without any worries, as I had done with Abigail, but couldn't anymore. At the end of each laugh, there was always some feeling of sadness that I couldn't escape. At times, I stared at Esther while she was busy doing paperwork. Whenever she sensed my eyes examining her face, she would throw a folded paper at me without looking in my direction. I would smile and put the folded paper in my pocket, pretending that the blank paper was a special note she had written to me. That afternoon, as Esther walked away from where I was on the rock, she continually turned around to wave at me until she disappeared behind one of the halls. I smiled back and forgot about my loneliness for the time being. The following day, Esther told me that there were visitors coming to the center. The staff had asked the boys to hold a talent show. Basically, we were all supposed to do something we were good at. You can sing your reggae songs, Esther suggested. How about a Shakespeare monologue, I asked. Okay, but I still think you should do some music. She put her arms around me. I'd become very fond of Esther, but refused to show it. She hugged me. Whenever she hugged me or put her arms around me, I would quickly break loose. Whenever she left, though, I watched her go. She had a unique and graceful walk. It was almost as if she sailed on the ground. I would always run to see her after class to tell her about my day. My friends Mambu and Alhaji made fun of me. Your girlfriend is here, Ishmael. Are you going to see you at all this afternoon? The visitors from the European Commission, the UN, UNICEF, and several NGOs arrived at the center in a convoy of cars one afternoon. They wore suits and ties and shook hands with each other before they started walking around the center. Some of the boys followed behind them, and I sat on the veranda with Mambu. All of the visitors were smiling, sometimes adjusting their ties or making notes of the writing pads they carried. Some of them looked into our sleeping places, and others took off their jackets and played hand wrestling games and tug of war with the boys. Afterward, they were sheep-herded into the dining room that had been set up quite nicely for the talent show. Mr. Kamara, the director of the center, gave a few remarks, and then boys started telling brass spider and monster stories and performing tribal dances. I read a monologue from Julius Caesar and performed a short hip-hop play about the redemption of a former child soldier that I had written with Esther's encouragement. After that event, I became popular at the center. Mr. Kamara called me to his office one morning and said, "You and your friends really impressed those visitors. They know now that it's possible for you boys to be rehabilitated." I was just happy to have had the chance to perform again, in peace. But Mr. Kamara was in high spirits. "How would you like to be the spokesperson for this center?" he asked me. What would I have to do or say?" I hesitantly asked. I was beginning to think that this whole thing was being blown out of proportion. "Well, to begin with, if there's an event on the issue of child soldiers, we'll write you something to read. Once you get comfortable, you can begin writing your own speech, or whatever you want." Mr. Kamar's serious face told me that he meant what he was saying. Not more than a week later, I was talking at gatherings in Freetown about child soldiering and how it must be stopped. "We can be rehabilitated," I would emphasize and point to myself as an example. I would always tell people that I believe children have the resilience to outlive their sufferings if given a chance. It was at the end of my 6th month when my childhood friend Mohammed arrived at the center. The last I'd seen him was when I left Mogbamweo with Taloy and Junior for a performance in Matrujan. He couldn't come with us that day because he was helping his father work in their kitchen. I had often wondered about what had happened to him, but I never thought I would see him again. I was returning from a gathering at St. Edward's Secondary School that evening when I saw this light-skinned, skinny boy with bony cheeks, sitting on a stoop by himself. He looked familiar, but I wasn't sure if I knew him. As I approached, he jumped up. "Hey man, remember me?" he exclaimed, and began doing the running man and singing, "Here Comes the Hammer." I joined him, and we did some of the moves we'd learned together for a group dance to this particular song. We high-fived each other and then hugged. He was still taller than me. We sat together on the stoop and briefly talked about our childhood pranks. Sometimes I think about those great times we had dancing at talent shows, practicing new dances, playing soccer until we couldn't see the ball. It seems like all those things happened a very long time ago. It's really strange, he said, looking away for a bit. I know, I said. You were a troublesome boy, he reminded me. I know. It was at the beginning of my 7th month at the rehabilitation center when Leslie came again to have a chat. I was called to a room in the hospital where he waited. When I walked into the room, he stood up to greet me. His face showed both grief and happiness. I had to ask him what the matter was. Are you all right? I studied him. Yes. He scratched his head and mumbled something to himself. I'm sorry about bringing this matter up again. I know it will upset you, but I have to be honest with you, Leslie said. He walked around the room and began, We cannot locate any immediate family members of yours, so we have to try to find you a foster family here in the city. I hope that will be fine with you. I will check on you after you've completed your rehabilitation to see how you're doing in your new life. He sat down and, looking at me, continued, Well, do you have any questions or concerns? Yes, I think so, I said. I told him that before the war, my father had spoken about my uncle who lived in the city. I did not even know what he looked like, much less where he lived. What's his name? Leslie asked. His name's Tommy, and my father told me he's a carpenter, I replied. Leslie was writing my mysterious uncle's name in his notebook. After he was done scribbling his notes, he said, No promises, but I will see what I can find out. I will get back to you soon. He paused, tapped me on the shoulder, and continued, I hear you're doing great. Keep it up. He walked out of the room. I didn't count on him being able to find my uncle in such a big city, especially with the little information I had provided. I left the room and went to see Esther on the other side of the building. She was busy putting away the new supplies of bandages and medicines in the cabinet that hung on the walls of the room. As soon as she noticed I was standing in the doorway, she began to smile and continued doing her work. I sat and waited for her to finish. How did the meeting with Leslie go? She asked as she put away the last box of medicine. I told her everything he had said, ending with my skepticism about whether Leslie would be able to find my uncle. She listened carefully and said, You never know. He might find him. One Saturday afternoon, as I chatted with Esther and Mohammed, Leslie walked in, smiling widely. I suspected he had found me a foster home and that I was going to be repatriated, the term used to describe the process of reuniting ex-child soldiers with their former communities. What is the good news? Esther asked. Leslie examined my curious face and then walked back to the door and opened it. A tall man walked in. He had a wide, genuine smile that made his face look like a little boy's. His hands were long, and he looked at me directly, smiling. He wasn't as light-skinned as my father. This is your uncle, Leslie proudly announced. Howdy body, Ishmael, the man said, and walked over to where I was sitting. He bent over and embraced me long and hard. My arms hung loose at my sides. What if he's just some man pretending to be my uncle, I thought. The man let go of me. He was crying, which is when I began to believe that he was really my family, because his crying was genuine, and men in my culture rarely cried. He crouched on his heels next to me and began, I am so sorry I never came to see you all those years. I wish I had met you before today. But we can't go back now. We just have to start from here. I am sorry for your losses. Leslie told me everything. He looked at Leslie with thankful eyes and continued, After you are done here, you can come and live with me. You are my son. I don't have much, but I will give you a place to sleep, food, and my love. He put his arms around me. No one had called me son in a very long time. I didn't know what to say. Everyone, it seemed, was waiting for my response. I turned to my uncle and smiled at him and said, Thank you for coming to see me. I really appreciate that you've offered me to stay with you, but I don't even know you. I put my head down. Like I said, we cannot go back, but we can start from here. I'm your family, and that is enough for us to begin liking each other, he replied, rubbing my head and laughing a little. I got up and hugged my uncle, and he embraced me harder than he had the first time and kissed me on the forehead. We briefly stood in silence when he began to speak again. I can't stay long because I have to finish some work in the other part of the city, but from now on I will visit you every weekend, and if it's okay, I would like you to come home with me at some point to see where I live and to meet my wife and children. Your family. My uncle's voice trembled as he was trying to hold back sobs. He rubbed my head with one hand and shook Leslie's hand with the other. Sir, from now on you will be informed about how this young man is doing, Leslie said.